the world is really shifting, isn't it? I mean, dramatically. We're definitely not in that relatively stable period after the Cold War anymore.
Not at all.
And the challenge for the U.S. military now feels, well, monumental. Protecting American interests, this really complex, multipolar world. And facing not just one, but two nuclear-armed adversaries. Adversaries who've made it pretty clear they want to challenge the global order.
That's absolutely right. The stakes are incredibly high, and the environment, it's just unforgiving.
Yeah.
If you look at the latest Joint Publication 1, Volume 1, the 2023 edition, it really lays it out. The military's core purpose hasn't changed: defend the Constitution and, crucially, deter a great power war.
Right, the big one.
Exactly. But the analysis in that document, it's quite sobering. It basically says the window we have to keep our competitive advantage, it's closing fast.
Why? What's driving that?
It's because of a really fundamental shift in the character of war itself. So the decisions we make right now about doctrine, about investment, they're going to dictate our national security for years to come.
Okay, so if the whole game is changing, how is the military supposed to navigate all this chaos?
Well, that's what we're here for, right?
That's the mission for this deep dive. We want to really unpack the key doctrinal pillars, the ideas that are guiding how the Joint Force has to adapt. We're focusing specifically on the vision laid out in those foundational documents you mentioned, Joint Publication 1, Volume 1, and also Joint Publication 3.0.
And the concepts for the future fight that stem from them.
Exactly. How do those big ideas actually translate into planning and building new capabilities?
So we'll explore what the military sees as its strategic North Star.
Okay.
We'll look at how the individual services, the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, how they're integrating their own specific designs to fit into that bigger picture.
Right, how they all play together.
And the really critical strategic shift, this idea of campaigning across the entire spectrum of conflict and forcing deep, seamless integration across all domains at the same time.
Wow, okay, that sounds like a massive undertaking.
It is. It's a huge intellectual effort, but we're going to break down the most essential pieces for you.
Wait, let's start with that North Star you mentioned. We've heard leaders, especially General Milley, the former chairman, talk about the joint warfighting concept, using that exact phrase, a navigational aid.
Yes.
But if it's not like a specific plan, step by step, how does it actually guide the whole Department of Defense?
It's more of an overarching framework, you see, not a rigid roadmap you follow blindly.
Okay.
The concept itself, it guides countless operations, activities, investments, because it provides a common strategic goal, something all the services are aiming for.
A shared direction.
Exactly. As it's laid out in the document, A Symphony of Capabilities, the joint warfighting concept gives us a deep understanding of the changing character of warfare, anticipates the operating environment, and guides how the joint force organizes, trains, and equips for future competition and conflict.
So it describes the challenge and the end state.
Precisely. It's that shared description of the environment and the common destination. That's what gives it the power to align everyone, while still giving the services the flexibility they need for their own force development.
That alignment sounds crucial. And that document, A Symphony of Capabilities, it uses this brilliant analogy comparing joint alignment to American jazz music. Can you kind of break that down? Why is jazz such a good fit for modern joint warfare?
Oh, it's a perfect metaphor, really, for what modern jointness needs to achieve.
How so?
Well, think about a jazz group, right? Each musician is incredibly skilled, capable of complex, spontaneous improvisation. They create their own lines. The music can go in all sorts of directions.
Right, they riff off each other.
Exactly. But for that improvisation to actually work, to sound coherent and, good, the musicians first have to know the basics, the scales, the chord structures, the melody.
Fundamentals.
Those fundamental rules provide the common foundation of knowledge. So for the joint force, the joint warfighting concept is like that foundation, the basic scales. It gives the services the strategic alignment and the flexibility to adapt and improvise their own force designs. But they're all still playing in harmony, moving towards that shared strategic vision.
That improvisation, that adaptability is critical because the adversary is improvising too, right?
Absolutely. They aren't following a script either. You have to be able to react and adapt together.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So if the joint warfighting concept is the sheet music, the basic structure, how are the individual services, these sort of highly specialized musicians, taking that core idea and turning it into their own unique but still aligned force designs? What are the specifics of that integration?
We're seeing really intentional, integrated transformations happening across the board. Take the Marine Corps Force Design 2030. That's a prime example.
Okay, Force Design 2030.
The Commandant, General Eric Smith, stated very clearly in a symphony of capabilities that this transformation is, quote, the vehicle by which we show our jointness.
So it's not just a Marine thing. It's explicitly about being part of the joint team.
Exactly. It's a commitment to the whole joint endeavor.
So what's the focus of that transformation, particularly when we think about jointness and this all-domain idea?
Well, its core transformation really emphasizes deep integration and synchronization, especially in that critical area of command and control.
E2. Okay.
Force Design 2030 aims to make sure those command and control capabilities can shift rapidly across the competition continuum, from peace to competition to conflict, and specifically, the goal is to enable all domain joint and combined kill webs.
Kill webs. That sounds intense. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, the term is stark, but it describes a network operational architecture. It's the ability to seamlessly connect sensors from one service, maybe a Navy satellite or an Air Force drone, to the right shooter from another service, like a Marine Corps ground-based missile system, or maybe an Army artillery unit.
So connecting anyone's eyes to anyone's shooter, essentially.
That's the idea. The focus is on integrated firepower and information superiority, making sure every component is inherently integrated with the larger joint force right from the start. It's a move away from the old service-specific kill chains.
Got it. Okay, what about the Navy? Their big concept is Distributed Maritime Operations, DMO. How does that fit in with integrated deterrence and the joint warfighting concept?
Distributed maritime operations is really the Navy's central organizing idea right now. It aims to boost naval lethality and survivability by spreading the force out geographically.
Making them harder to target.
Exactly. Harder for an adversary to find and target effectively, while at the same time providing critical advantages to the overall joint force. The Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Lisa Franchetti, confirmed that supporting integrated deterrence and the principles of the joint warfighting concept is what's guiding the Navy's spending and acquisition priorities.
That sounds like a pretty massive shift in how they prioritize investments. That Symphony of Capabilities document mentions 6 specific force design imperatives guiding the Navy's spending. Can you walk us through those? Why are they so essential for distributed maritime operations?
Absolutely. And they really show how the Navy is adapting to a world where their ships are constantly under surveillance.
Okay.
So the 6 imperatives are, first, expand distance. That means pushing forces further apart to make the adversary's targeting problem much harder.
Makes sense.
Second, leverage deception. This is critical for hiding the true location and intent of naval assets. You can't just rely on hiding anymore.
Right.
Third, harden defense. That's about making ships and systems physically more survivable against sophisticated attacks, missiles, cyber, electronic warfare, you name it.
Okay. Distance, deception, defense. What about the other 3? They sound more offensive or informational.
They continue with. Fourth, increased distribution. This reinforces the core DMO idea by spreading out command and control nodes and assets across a much wider area. No single point of failure.
Right. Decentralized.
Fifth, ensure delivery. This focuses on the huge challenge of logistics and sustainment needed to operate these distributed forces, often far from established bases. How do you keep them supplied and fighting?
A huge problem.
And finally, sixth, generate decision advantage. This involves using information tech, artificial intelligence, better intelligence, gathering everything needed so our commanders can make decisions faster and more accurately than the enemy.
Faster loops.
Exactly. These 6 imperatives together are fundamentally changing how the Navy plans to fight and sustain itself in a high-end conflict.
That emphasis on integrated deterrence really seems foundational across the board. What about the Air Force? What's their unique contribution to this joint picture?
The Air Force future operating concept is their design. It centers on 5 core functions we typically associate with air power: air superiority, global strike, rapid global mobility, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, and importantly, integrated command and control.
Okay.
The Vice Chief of Staff, General David Alvin, really stressed the overriding need for continuous adaptation, flexibility, and alignment, responding constantly to that changing character of war we talked about.
We heard the joint warfighting concept itself talks about agile control. Is the Air Force concept specifically trying to build on that idea? prioritizing adaptability, maybe even over raw, specialized power.
That seems to be the profound trade-off they're grappling with, yes.
Yeah.
General Albin is pushing for systems, material, and importantly, airmen that can handle multiple functions and requirements.
Multi-role.
Yes. He said, according to a symphony of capabilities, they should never take in another system without factoring in agility and the rapid pace of change.
So if you prioritize agility, does that mean you lose some of that super specialized, optimized capability we saw in older planes or systems?
Perhaps slightly, yes. That's the potential trade-off. But the doctrinal conclusion seems to be that adaptability, the ability to switch roles, to integrate quickly, is actually a superior trait in this modern environment compared to single-purpose optimization, which can be more easily countered by an adaptive enemy.
Interesting. Okay, and we can't forget the domains that have just exploded in importance lately.
Yeah.
What about the Space Force and also the huge role of the National Guard?
Right. The Space Force is essentially purpose-built to reinforce the joint warfighting concept. Its core competencies, things like space security, combat power projection from space, space mobility and logistics, ensuring information can move freely, and space domain awareness, knowing what's up there. All of these are designed to enable the entire joint force, providing secure comms, precise targeting data, enabling global mobility. I mean, without the Space Force, these advanced concepts like distributed maritime operations and Force Design 2030, they just don't work. They're non-starters.
So space is the ultimate enabler here.
Absolutely critical.
And the National Guard, they play a different but still crucial role in this whole ecosystem.
They really do. You know, the National Guard Bureau represents about 20% of the entire U.S. military. It's huge.
Wow, 20%.
And their role, as Lieutenant General Mark Sasseville emphasized, is critical for dissemination. They have to make sure every single one of their soldiers and airmen understands the joint warfighting concept and knows their specific role in future joint operations.
Taking the high-level concept down to the unit level.
Exactly. And they use exercises, like one called Agile Chariot, specifically to make sure the Guard's current capabilities align across the services, making sure they're truly ready to plug and play when they get called up for joint missions.
Okay, so that covers the guiding vision and how the services are aligning. But to really get why these changes are so necessary, we need to go back to basics, right? Understand the foundations of warfighting itself.
Definitely. And specifically, we need to grasp that critical difference between the enduring nature of war and its ever-changing character.
Let's define that clearly for everyone listening. What exactly stays constant about the nature of war?
The nature of war, as Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 meticulously defines it, is constant. It's deeply rooted in the human condition.
Human factors.
Yes. It's fundamentally linked by violence, which inherently stirs up emotion and passion.
Right.
It's defined by uncertainty, Clausewitz's fog of war.
Right.
It involves unpredictability, pure chance, and this natural, continuous tendency to escalate. It always wants to get bigger, more violent.
Wow.
So this mix of violence, passion, chance, it constantly works against the clear-headed thinking you need to actually prosecute a war effectively.
It sounds like this constant battle against chaos and human emotion. So how does the doctrine tell commanders to manage those inherent messy characteristics? Especially that idea of friction.
Friction. It's the accumulation of all those difficulties: danger, fear, confusion, physical stress, unexpected breakdowns. It can thwart the enemy's plan, but it can also seriously hamper your own efforts.
And you can't get rid of it.
No, commanders can't eliminate friction in war. It's just unavoidable. But Joint Publication 1, Volume 1, says they must minimize its impact.
Ow!
Through rigorous, realistic training, through adaptive doctrine, well-practiced planning, and maybe most importantly, through decentralized decision-making.
And that decentralized approach, that's the core leadership philosophy we call mission command, right? Where subordinates act decisively based on the commander's overall intent.
Exactly. Mission command is absolutely paramount because friction and the incredible time compression you see on the modern battlefield, especially in an all-domain fight, it means decisions often can't wait to be pushed up the chain of command.
No time.
Subordinates have to have the training, the understanding of the intent, and the authority to act on what are called mission-type orders. They need to exercise disciplined initiative to achieve what the commander wanted, even if the situation changes.
This push for decentralized decisions suggests that commanders at the operational level have a really big job connecting the overall strategy to the immediate tactical fight, which brings us to the levels of warfare.
Yes, the three levels: strategic, operational, and tactical. They're the framework we use to link those tactical actions on the ground or in the air or wherever to achieving the big, overarching strategic objectives.
And there aren't hard lines between them.
No, there are no hard finite boundaries. They bleed into each other, but they're critical conceptual tools. They help joint force commanders plan, synchronize efforts, allocate resources, assign tasks across time and space. And sitting right in the middle, bridging the tactical and the strategic, is operational art.
Okay, operational art is the bridge. How does Joint Publication 3.0 define that in practice? What does that cognitive approach actually look like for a commander?
Operational art is the cognitive approach commanders use to organize and employ military forces. According to Joint Publication 3.0, it integrates four key things. The ends, what are the objectives? The ways, how are we going to operate? What's the method?
Right.
The means, what resources do we have? Troops, ships, planes, intel assets. And finally, risks, what are the acceptable losses or trade-offs we're willing to make?
Ends, ways means risk.
That's it. Operational art is where human judgment, decision-making, and adaptation really come into play, especially when you're dealing with imperfect information, which is always.
We have a really fascinating historical example of operational art in action. The Solomons campaign in World War II, Joint Publication 3.0 details it. Why is that campaign such a perfect case study?
Oh, it was a true crucible, a real test for adapting doctrine and making decisions under extreme pressure. The American commanders, they were operating at the absolute limits of their supply lines, their operational reach, fighting through incredibly difficult jungle terrain and unpredictable weather.
So tough conditions. What about intelligence?
Strategic intelligence only gave them general indicators. So commanders on the ground faced periods of profound uncertainty. They were constantly dealing with incomplete, wrong, and often contradictory intelligence reports. The fog of war was thick.
So the chaos and friction were just overwhelming. What specific judgment calls did the American commanders make better than their Japanese opponents in that campaign?
They showed superior judgment in seizing and then holding advanced bases and, critically, sustaining those isolated forces. That's the essence of operational art when your logistics are stretched thin.
Keeping the forces in the fight.
Yes. They adapted quickly to that fog of war and proved much better at making timely decisions even with imperfect information. By gaining sea control around the islands, they achieved operational level objectives that were absolutely critical.
Why critical?
Because those achievements enabled the successful follow-on campaigns island hopping that eventually put the Japanese homeland itself at risk. That's operational art in action, taking tactical wins and translating them into major strategic progress despite all the chaos.
Beyond operational art, doctrine gives us core guidance through the principles of war. We often hear about the traditional 9.
Right. Objective, offensive, mass, maneuver, economy of force, unity of command, security, surprise, and simplicity. They're still the bedrock.
But you're saying contemporary conflict, especially the strategic competition we're in, and conflicts fought under the global microscope, they needed something more.
Exactly. The traditional 9 are still core, but today's environment demands 3 essential additions. These are detailed in both Joint Publication 1, Volume 1, and Joint Publication 3.0.
Okay, what are the new additions?
First, there's restraint. This is the principle of using only the amount of force truly necessary to achieve the objective and influence the adversary. It demands proportionality. You don't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
Makes sense. What's second?
Second is resilience. This is defined as the quality that lets forces recover quickly from loss or setback. And this is absolutely vital in an all-domain fight where systems will inevitably be degraded or destroyed. You have to be able to take a punch and keep going.
Okay, restraint, resilience. And the third one seems incredibly important in our information-saturated age: legitimacy.
Legitimacy is paramount for joint operations today. It means maintaining legal and moral authority, both at home and internationally.
The perception of rightness.
Exactly. The belief that the actions of the joint force are just, lawful, and necessary. This affects everything: domestic support, funding from Congress, the willingness of international partners to join a coalition. Losing legitimacy can turn tactical victories into strategic defeats very quickly.
So it sounds like the joint force doesn't just have to be militarily effective. It also has to be seen as morally, legally, and communicatively sound by the whole world.
That's a huge part of it now, yes. And to achieve this level of integrated, synchronized, action effective, and legitimate, all commanders rely on a common framework. the joint functions.
Okay.
Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 outlines these 7 functions that are common to all joint operations: command and control, information, intelligence, fires, movement and maneuver, protection, and sustainment.
7 core functions. Do they change depending on whether we're in competition or conflict? Or are they always working together?
They're used continuously across that entire competition continuum we talked about. Commanders are constantly leveraging capabilities from multiple joint functions at the same time. For instance, intelligence obviously informs fires. Command and control governs movement and maneuver.
They're all intertwined.
Completely. The integration of activities across these functions to get tasks done happens seamlessly, or should happen seamlessly, at all levels of command. Which is exactly why this shift towards joint all-domain operations demands such tight convergence between these functions.
That brings us perfectly to the idea of campaigning. The joint force isn't just sitting back waiting for a war anymore. The doctrine says they have to persistently campaign across that whole spectrum of competition.
That's right. Campaigning is defined in Joint Publication 1, Volume 1, and Joint Publication 3.0 as the persistent conduct and sequencing of military activities. But critically, it's aligned with the other instruments of national power.
Diplomatic, informational, military, economic, the DIME instrument.
Exactly, aligning all those DIMI instruments to achieve prioritized objectives over time. And that alignment is mission critical because the competition we face today rarely involves just military action alone. It's usually a combination.
And this persistent campaigning happens across what the doctrine calls the competition continuum. You mentioned 3 states that often overlap.
That's correct. The 3 states are cooperation with allies and partners, competition below the threshold of armed conflict, and finally, armed conflict or war. Combatant commanders are continuously campaigning across all 3 states simultaneously in different parts of the world.
Doing what?
Trying to deter aggression, assure our allies and partners, compete effectively below that threshold of war, and then be ready to prevail decisively if conflict does break out. And a huge amount of effort today is focused squarely on that middle state, strategic competition.
So how does the doctrine help us think about that strategic competition? What are the key factors that drive success or failure in that space?
Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 lays out 4 key interrelated factors of competition. First, you have interests. These are the qualities a nation values and wants to protect, things like physical security, economic prosperity, our way of life, continuity of government. These are the stakes, what we're competing for.
Okay, interests. What are the next 3? They sound more like the mechanics of how we compete.
They are, precisely. Second is influence. That's the ability to cause an effect. It could be direct through observable actions or indirect through intangible things like shaping narratives or cultural appeal, soft power sometimes.
Right.
Third is advantage. This means achieving some kind of superiority of position or condition. It could be a physical advantage, like controlling key terrain or resources, or it could be cognitive things, like having the initiative or higher morale or a better understanding of the situation.
Okay, interest, influence, advantage. And the 4th factor is about using those advantages.
Yes. The 4th is leverage. That's the ability to actually apply your means, your resources, your advantages to affect someone else's behavior, to get them to do something or not do something.
And what's critical here?
What's critical, according to Joint Publication 1, Volume 1, is realizing that a lot of strategic competition involves non-military and non-coercive activities.
Not just military threats.
Right. Competitors often use subtle strategies, co-optation, attraction, think economic incentives, cultural outreach programs, big infrastructure investments like Belt and Road. These are often more effective and certainly less provocative than explicit military coercion alone. They try to create this sort of gravitational pull towards their sphere of influence.
But the military tool is still used for overt coercion sometimes. Right? You mentioned the difference between deterrence and compulsion. Why is compulsion forcing an adversary to change something they're already doing so much harder than deterrence stopping them from doing something in the first place?
Yeah, this is a really subtle but critical distinction. It's detailed in Joint Publication 3.0. Compulsion is inherently more difficult because it requires the adversary's overt submission. They have to publicly back down.
Wow.
Deterrence, on the other hand, lets the adversary save face. They can always claim they chose not to act for their own reasons. But compelling a change in behavior means the adversary has to visibly reverse a policy they've already committed to. They've invested prestige, resources, maybe whipped up domestic support for it.
So forcing them to back down publicly risks humiliating them, which could backfire strategically.
It really can. That external humiliation risks inflaming the adversary's political passions, as the doctrine puts it. The attempt at coercion might actually end up mobilizing domestic support for the adversary's government, strengthening their resolve, making them less likely to bend to future pressure.
So what's the key to successful coercion then?
Joint Publication 6 emphasizes that it requires commanders to have a really sound diagnosis, a realistic appraisal of the adversary's decision-making process. You have to understand their values, their perceptions, what they're truly willing to lose, and what their sense of honor demands they cannot lose. It's deeply psychological.
Speaking of influence and non-kinetic power, we noted earlier that information itself has been elevated to a full joint function, recognizing its role at all levels. What's the doctrine's specific guidance on using information?
Joint Publication 3 details that the goal is to leverage the inherent informational aspects of all military activities to achieve objectives.
Everything sends a message.
Exactly. Every exercise, every troop movement, every public statement has an informational effect, intended or not. So commanders have to deliberately integrate information into everything they do. The aim is to reinforce the legitimacy of U.S. actions while simultaneously challenging or undermining the perceived legitimacy and cohesion of adversary actions and narratives.
So it's narrative warfare fought alongside physical operations.
In concert with them, yes.
That makes sense. Do we have a good historical example of using military deception for this kind of informational purpose at the strategic level?
Oh, the classic example, also detailed in Joint Publication 3.0, is Operation Bodyguard. That was the massive, complex military deception plan leading up to the Normandy landings in 1944.
D-Day.
The goal of that entire scheme, which involved phantom armies commanded by Patton, fake radio traffic, double agents feeding misinformation, was purely informational.
What was the message?
To reinforce the German High Command's existing belief that the main Allied invasion would happen at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel, far from the actual landing beaches in Normandy.
How do they make the Germans believe it?
Well, the foundation of successful deception, as the doctrine notes, is often to support and encourage the enemy's existing expectations. Because the Pas de Calais was geographically the most logical place to invade, the Allies just fed that expectation with a massive amount of carefully crafted false data.
And it worked.
It worked brilliantly. It achieved stunning strategic surprise, leaving the Germans poorly positioned to counterattack the real landings in Normandy. It perfectly illustrates how the informational joint function can shape the physical outcome of a major campaign.
Let's talk about another competitive strategy that often relies on indirect approaches: irregular warfare.
Right. Irregular warfare is defined in Joint Publication 3.0 as a struggle, usually between state and non-state actors, or sometimes among non-state actors themselves, to influence populations and affect legitimacy.
So it's about winning hearts and minds, or undermining the other side's legitimacy.
That's a big part of it, and it explicitly favors indirect, unorthodox, asymmetric approaches. Think insurgency, counterinsurgency, using non-state armed groups, state-controlled irregular forces. It's inherently a competition that's persistent, often long-term, focused on eroding the opponent's will and their control over the population.
And we see nation-states using irregular methods more and more, often through proxies, right? To keep some distance, maintain plausible deniability.
Absolutely. Joint Publication 6, Chapter 6, uses the example of Iran leveraging surrogates across the Middle East, the Shia Crescent.
Groups like Hezbollah and Lebanon.
Exactly. Groups like Lebanon's Hezbollah, or Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq, they demonstrate a really crucial point. When you have a strong cultural or ideological bond between the principal, in this case Iran, and the agent or surrogate, it can create a highly resilient, adaptive, and dangerous relationship. These surrogates are often capable of taking on high levels of risk for the principal.
And this indirect approach lets the principal, Iran, achieve effects like harassing U.S. forces or denying freedom of movement without directly triggering a major conflict that would invite massive retaliation against Iran itself.
Precisely. It's a way to compete and impose costs below the threshold of major state-on-state war.
Okay, so we've covered the foundations, the principles, the need for persistent campaigning across the continuum. Now let's pivot fully to the future fight. The doctrine is laser-focused on preparing for that through Joint All-Domain Operations, or JADO.
This is really the critical transition, isn't it? Moving from the theoretical foundations to the operational necessity. As the document's strategic inflection point makes crystal clear, the security environment is now truly transregional. Threats aren't confined to one area. It's all domain land, sea, air, space, cyber, and its multifunctional threats cut across different areas.
And space and cyber change everything.
They do. The increasing development and militarization of space and cyber platforms means, as the document says, the decisive terrain will not be limited to the Earth's surface. The fundamental aspects of warfare, how we see, how we shoot, how we move, communicate, protect ourselves, sustain ourselves, they're all being fundamentally rewritten by these domains.
And this demands a massive shift in doctrine, right? Moving
Yeah.
beyond what we used to call jointness.
It absolutely does. Joint Publication 3 below, Appendix D on Joint All-Domain Operations, provides the most crucial insight here. Historically, joint doctrine focused on guiding commanders in deconflicting service-centric operations.
Meaning, making sure the Navy wasn't accidentally bombing the Army, or the Air Force wasn't jamming Navy radars.
Basically, yes. Coordinating so the services stayed out of each other's way. Against a near-peer, highly capable enemy, that service-centric, deconfliction-based approach is now considered obsolete. It's too slow, too predictable, too vulnerable.
So what replaces deconfliction?
Joint all-domain operations demands deep integration and synchronization across all domains. And not just in one small area, but spanning multiple areas of responsibility, potentially entire geographic regions simultaneously.
Wow. If deconfliction is out, what's the core concept driving this necessary merger of efforts? What makes JADO work?
The central concept is convergence. Joint Publication 3 to Appendix D defines convergence as bringing together the right capabilities at decisive points across all 5 domains: land, sea, air, space, and cyber.
The right tool at the right place at the right time.
Exactly. But achieving that requires synthesizing information from every joint function we talked about: command and control, intelligence, space operations, cyber operations, operations in the joint electromagnetic spectrum, military deception, operations security, protection, all of it.
You need to pull all those threads together.
To gain an all-domain advantage, the resulting operational plan has to identify those high-payoff targets, wherever they are, and then align tasks across all domains to generate the desired effects, all synchronized in time and space.
That sounds like an absolutely overwhelming intelligence problem. How do you even find those high payoff targets when they might not be physical things like tanks or ships, but maybe nodes in a network or critical data streams?
It is indeed a profound intelligence challenge, and it requires a doctrinal shift in how intelligence operates. An all-domain intelligence estimate can't just focus on the visible domains. It must identify those highest payoff targets in the less visible domains: cyberspace, the electromagnetic spectrum, the information environment.
Targeting networks and systems.
Yes. Disrupting, degrading, or destroying these targets, which are often critical, interconnected networks of military and civilian information systems, is now seen as crucial for maximizing the operation's success. You're not just targeting the tank anymore. You're targeting the network that tells the tank where to go, the data link that gives it targeting information, the satellite that provides its communication.
This reliance on finding and acting on massive amounts of data almost instantly brings up technology. Is the sheer speed of decision-making becoming the ultimate competitive advantage in this future fight?
It seems absolutely paramount. Joint Publication 1, Volume 1, Chapter 6 highlights this directly. It states that advantage will reside with the opponent, who can collect the most vital information, accurately and quickly analyze it, and then rapidly and securely disseminate it to the right people or systems.
The ODA loop on steroids.
Essentially, yes. The enemy who can perceive, process, and act faster wins the temporal fight. They get inside the adversary's decision cycle.
And the doctrine explicitly mentions artificial intelligence here. How is AI and machine learning expected to change decision-making for the warfighter?
The document highlights the huge potential of artificial intelligence to reform military decision-making processes at all levels: tactical, operational, strategic. AI can enable rapid assessments and decisions at speeds simply beyond human cognitive limits.
Processing vast amounts of data instantly.
Exactly. This enables what the doctrine calls human-machine teaming. The idea isn't to replace the human, but to give the human warfighter exponentially increased cognitive and physical abilities, allowing them to make faster, better-informed choices under extreme stress and time pressure, ultimately prevailing over the enemy.
But doesn't that focus on speed and optimized systems create vulnerabilities? If everything is perfectly efficient, lean, just in time, doesn't that make it brittle? One hit takes it down.
That is precisely the tension. The tension between modern systems design, which often prioritizes efficiency, and the harsh realities of high-end conflict where things will break, systems will go down.
So how does doctrine balance efficiency with survival?
Joint Publication 1, Volume 1 emphasizes that optimizing only for efficiency creates severe vulnerability. So, in the all-domain fight, resilience is paramount. You have to be able to absorb damage and continue functioning.
How do you build resilience?
Joint Force commanders achieve resilience through 4 key strategies, according to the doctrine. First, depth. That means maintaining strategic reserves of resources, personnel, equipment, not using everything up front.
Okay.
Second, redundancy. Having backup systems, alternative communication paths, multiple ways to achieve a critical function.
Makes sense.
Third, exchangeability. This is the ability to substitute a lost asset with another one, even if it's slightly different, but can still do the job adequately. Flexibility.
Right.
And fourth, dispersal. Spreading assets out, like in distributed maritime operations, so a single successful attack isn't catastrophic to the overall system or mission.
Depth, redundancy, exchangeability, dispersal. And this need for resilience, it has to go beyond just the military's own equipment and networks, right?
Yes, and this is a major vulnerability the doctrine recognizes. Joint Publication 3.0 reminds us that resilience must extend to the vast commercial infrastructure the Joint Force relies heavily upon, both here at home and abroad.
Things like GPS, communications networks,
Right.
power grids.
Exactly. Everything from GPS satellites, which are often commercially owned or operated, to undersea fiber optic cables, to telecommunications networks, energy infrastructure. Adversary cyber and space capabilities mean they can target critical national infrastructure, not just military bases. This transforms the American homeland itself into a contested space in a future war, as noted in Strategic Inflection Point.
Wow. Okay. This has been an incredibly extensive deep dive,
Yeah.
really getting into the heart of modern defense strategy. We started with that huge strategic challenge, deterring great power war in this complex world.
Right, and we moved through the guiding vision, the joint warfighting concept, as that North Star. We looked at how the services are trying to integrate their specific designs, like Force Design 2030 and distributed maritime operations.
And the need to persistently campaign across that whole continuum of cooperation, competition, and potential conflict.
And we landed firmly on the strategic necessity of joint all-domain operations, or JDRO. This demand for seamless, synchronized convergence across all the domains, physical and virtual, to achieve that crucial decision advantage.
It's clear the doctrine itself is adapting, trying to keep pace with the changing character of war, demanding faster decisions, much deeper integration, and greater resilience.
It is. The intellectual framework is evolving rapidly.
Yet, achieving this true jointness, this really deep integration across different services, different domains, that's historically been a really tough nut to crack, hasn't it?
It has been a persistent challenge. The analysis and the evolution of joint warfare reminds us of the historical struggles, specifically the really intense inter-service bickering that was documented after the Key West agreements back in the late 1940s.
Trying to divide up roles and missions.
Exactly. And that dysfunction ultimately led Congress to step in and pass the Goldwater-Nichols Act in 1986. That's the law that mandated officers serve in joint duty assignments, joint billets. The intent was to force the creation of leaders with a broader, less service-centric perspective.
But the critique you often hear today is that the personnel system itself, the way the officer corps is managed, promotion timelines, career paths, it was largely set up during the industrial age, back in the 1940s, and maybe it hasn't kept pace.
That's the core of the critique, that the result of that rigid industrial age structure is actually a misalignment with what the modern doctrine demands. Officers face intense pressure to meet very specific timelines to qualify the maximum number of people for the next promotion.
So they move through jobs quickly.
Right.
Right.
Which often means that highly talented people serve only the minimum required time in those crucial joint billets, just long enough to check the box.
So the doctrine is demanding this broad, all-domain strategic perspective.
But the culture and the personnel system, designed for a different era, might actually be preventing officers from spending enough time immersed in that joint world to truly develop the comprehensive, deep expertise that joint all-domain operations seems to require. They don't get the reps, the deep understanding.
So here's the challenge. The final thought maybe, for you listening, especially future leaders, the doctrine clearly demands this complex, decentralized mission command. It requires highly flexible, all-domain thinkers who can synthesize huge amounts of disparate information incredibly quickly. But if the personnel system is culturally pushing officers through joint tours too fast for them to really assimilate that strategic picture, what structural changes or maybe cultural shifts need to happen in leader development? How do we actually foster the kind of comprehensive thinkers needed to execute joint all-domain operations effectively in this really complex, dangerous, multipolar world.
It really brings it back to the human element, doesn't it? That's the ultimate challenge that lies at the heart of maintaining our competitive advantage.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the future of joint warfighting.